thevoicebeforethevoid.net. Hazel Minor and the 1920 North Dakota Blizzard. Compiled from Wikipedia and read by The Voice Before the Void. The 1920 North Dakota blizzard was a severe 3-day blizzard that killed 34 people from March 15th to March 18th, 1920, in the state of North Dakota. High winds and an 8-inch snowfall stopped rail service in Bismarck, knocked out telephone service between Devils Lake and Fargo, and left only one functioning telephone line between Fargo and Minneapolis, Minnesota. It is one of the worst North Dakota blizzards on record. Among the victims across North Dakota were Charles Hutchins, who lived north of the town of Douglas, the 12-year-old son of Matt Yashenko, who lived 5 miles south of the town of Russo, Chicken Pete Johnson, an eccentric who was found dead in his dugout on South Hill in Minot, the young mother, Mrs. Andrew Whitehead, the 4 Volk brothers, and Hazel Minor. Mrs. Andrew Whitehead was driving a horse and buggy between Devil's Lake and Fort Totten with her 3-year-old son when the blizzard hit. When the horses became too tired to continue, she stopped the buggy and set the horses loose. Mrs. Whitehead was found frozen to death in a snowdrift, holding her son in her arms. The hands and feet of the little boy were frostbitten, but he survived. The Volk brothers were 4 young brothers of the town of Ryder, who died during the blizzard as they made their way home from school. Herman, 9 years old, Soren, 10 years old, Ernest, 13 years old, and Adolf, 14 years old, were the 4 oldest sons of Gust Volk, a German immigrant from Schleswig-Holstein, Germany. Gust Volk was the former bodyguard to Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. The boys, who were the only students to attend school that day, decided to drive their horses and sled the 2 miles home from their one-room school. They made it to within 3/4 of a mile from the farm, but had to stop when the horses could pull the sled no further. The eldest brother, Adolf, bundled up his siblings and left them to find help. Gust Volk found his 14-year-old son's body within a 1/4 mile of their farm. He found his 3 younger sons curled up together in the box of the wagon. One of the boys was dead, and the other 2 were dying. Hazel Dulce Minor, 15 years old, of the town of Center in Oliver County, died while protecting her 10-year-old brother Emmett and 8-year-old sister Meredith from the blizzard. After her death, she became an American national heroine. Her actions were celebrated in a folk ballad and paintings and were published in many newspapers, magazines, and books in the subsequent decades. Hazel was the daughter of William Albert Minor, a farmer, and his wife, the former Blanche Steele, both originally of Iowa. In addition to Emmett and Meredith, Hazel's siblings included 21-year-old sister Zelda and 5-year-old brother Howard. Hazel was an 8th grade student at a one-room school, the same attended by Emmett and Meredith. The Oliver County Register of Deeds, whose daughter had played with Hazel, recalled, "Kind of a quiet girl she was," and described her as sort of motherly for one so young. Hazel's father considered her highly dependable. Her obituary described her as quiet and loving, with a sunny, cheerful nature, and having a liking for children. Hazel had planned to start high school in Bismarck that fall. On March 15th, 1920, the first day of the blizzard, the school dismissed its students early to enable them to go home before the storm arrived. Many of the students, like the Miner children, were used to driving to and from school with a horse and buggy. But the school teacher had a rule that no child was permitted to drive home in bad weather without permission from a parent. William Miner, who was worried about the blizzard conditions, rode the 2 miles to the school on a saddle horse to escort his children home. At about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, at the school, Miner hitched the children's horse, Old Maud, to their light sleigh and told Hazel to wait while he went back to the school's barn to get his horse. Hazel wasn't strong enough to keep the horse from heading out into the blizzard before her father came back from the barn. William Miner searched for his children, but soon realized that they must have gotten lost, and went home to organize a search party. Via telephone, farm families from the surrounding countryside summoned men to join the search for the missing Miner children. Even though she was familiar with the road, Hazel quickly became disoriented due to the blinding, blowing white snow, which made it impossible to see more than a few feet in front of her. She was dressed in a warm coat, hat, gloves, and sturdy one-buckle overshoes, but the clothing was insufficient protection against the wind and freezing temperatures, and her hands and feet became numb in the cold. When the sleigh hit a coulee, Hazel slid from the sleigh into waist-deep, mushy snow. She said, "Oh my, I am wet clear to the waist, and my shoes are full of water," her brother recalled later. Her prolonged exposure virtually guaranteed eventual severe hypothermia. The horse's harness slipped, and Hazel had to readjust it. She led the horse forward through the blizzard, but found she had lost sight of the road. There were few landmarks on the prairie to guide the children. The children continued traveling and growing more tired and cold. Then the sleigh again hit an obstruction and tipped over, throwing Hazel over the dashboard into the snow. Hazel, Emmett, and Meredith tried to push the sleigh upright, but were not strong enough to lift it, even with all three pushing at once. Using the overturned sleigh as a shelter, Hazel spread 2 blankets, told Emma and Meredith to lie down, and placed a 3rd blanket atop them. The children tried to keep moving to stay warm. Hazel huddled beside her brother and sister and used her body heat to warm them. She told them stories to keep them awake. The children sang all 4 verses of America the Beautiful, a song they had sung during opening exercises at the country school that morning, and repeated the Lord's Prayer. Hazel advised her siblings, "Remember, you mustn't go to sleep, even if I do. Promise me you won't, no matter how sleepy you get. Keep each other awake. Promise?" Her brother and sister promised. Throughout the night, the children could hear a dog barking somewhere nearby, but no one came to their aid. As the night wore on, Hazel talked less and less, until she finally became silent. Her brother Emmett later recalled the blizzard for an article in the March 15th, 1963 issue of the Bismarck Tribune newspaper. The robe kept blowing down, and Hazel kept pulling it up until she got so she couldn't put it up anymore. Then she covered us up with the robe and lay down on top of it. I told Hazel to get under the covers too, but she said she had to keep us children warm, and she wouldn't do it. I tried to get out to put the cover over Hazel, but I could not move because she was lying on the cover. The snow would get in around our feet. We couldn't move them. Then Hazel would break the crust for us. After a while, she could not break the crust anymore. She just lay still and groaned. I thought she must be dead. Then I kept talking to Meredith, so she wouldn't go to sleep. A search party of more than 30 men looked for the children throughout the afternoon and evening. They had to give up when it grew dark, but set out again the next morning. When they finally found the children, it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on March 16th, 25 hours since the children had first set out from the schoolhouse. The overturned sleigh, with the horse still hitched up to it, was resting in a coulee 2 miles south of the school. With breathless haste, we hurried to the rig, and will never forget the sight that met our eyes, one of the men reported. The searchers found the rigid Hazel lying over her siblings, covering them with her body. Her coat, which she had unbuttoned, was spread over the bodies of the 2 younger children, and her arms were stretched out over them. Beneath her, still alive, were Emmett and Meredith. Maud, the old horse, was standing beside the overturned sled, also still alive. If the horse had moved, the 3 children would have been tipped into the snow. They took the 3 children to the house of William Stark, a neighbor, for immediate care. Stark's daughter, Anna Stark Benjamin, who was 4.5 years old at the time, remembered the sound of Hazel's outstretched arms as they brushed against the furniture as they brought her into the house, and took her into my parents' bedroom. The crackling sound, as that of frozen laundry brought in off the clothesline in winter. Then I remember the crying. So much crying. They worked over Hazel for hours, trying to revive her, but without success. Hazel's mother, Blanche, was brought to the Stark house after the searchers found the children, and sat in a chair, rocking back and forth, while they tended to the 3 children. Throughout the night when the children were missing, she had been kept company by neighbors. At one point, she drifted off to sleep, and said later that her daughter had come to her in a dream. In the dream, Hazel said, "I was cold, Mama, but I'm not anymore." At Hazel's funeral, the minister preached a sermon on the Christian Bible verse John 15:13. "Greater love hath no man, that he lay down his life for his friend," and said, "Here and there are occasionally people who by their acts and lives endeavor to imitate him." Hazel became a posthumous heroine after her story became known. On January 15th, 1921, an article in the North Dakota Children's Home Finder appeared about how this guardian angel of the prairies, covered with a thick sheet of ice, gave up her own life to save her brother and sister. A memorial committee was established in Center and talked of naming a new hospital in Hazel's honor. But some months later, her parents said they wanted a memorial statue erected instead. Children across the state collected money to pay for a memorial. Emmett and Meredith were interviewed by various North Dakota newspapers numerous times in the years following the blizzard, and many articles were written about Hazel. The story eventually attracted national attention. In 1952, the Ford Motor Company commissioned 2 paintings of scenes from the story by North Dakota artist Elmer Halverson. The paintings and an article about Hazel Miner were published in the February 1953 edition of the Ford Times. A folk ballad entitled "The Story of Hazel Miner" was written by folk artist Chuck Suchey of Mandan, North Dakota. The song was included on Suchey's Much to Share 1986 album and on his Dancing Dakota 1989 album. In the song, recalling Hazel's outstretched arms, Suchey sings of wings on the snow and in warmth below her love survived. The May 30th, 2002 centennial issue of the Center Republican newspaper featured a story about Hazel Miner, Angel of the Prairies. The story was also recounted in Joe Wheeler's 2002 anthology, Everyday Heroes, inspiring stories of ordinary people who made a difference. A Gothic-style granite monument honoring Hazel's memory was erected in front of the Oliver County Courthouse in 1936, 16 years after her death, by former North Dakota Governor L.B. Hanna. The stone reads, "In memory of Hazel Miner. To the dead, a tribute. To the living, a memory. To posterity, an inspiration." Hazel's grave can be found in the Center Community Cemetery in Oliver County. Today, the story of Hazel and her actions during the 1920 blizzard are studied by students in North Dakota as part of North Dakota history. This sound file and all text in the articles are licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 3.0 unported license, available at creativecommons.org. www.ccc.org.